Have you ever considered the possibility of facing life's ups and downs with such profound tranquility that nothing around you could shake your inner balance? Imagine walking your path amidst criticism, conflict, others' opinions, and moments of uncertainty without allowing these circumstances to dominate your thoughts or emotions. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent or insensitive, but developing a stability that springs from within. This inner strength emerges when you stop being driven by impulsive reactions, fears learned throughout life, and the constant need for external approval. Carl Jung, one of the great scholars of the human psyche, invites us precisely to explore this inner territory. He proposes that we observe our own mind attentively, like someone following a silent experiment, noticing what happens when we choose not to surrender our power to external situations. For a few moments, imagine yourself going through the day with the serenity of someone who observes without getting lost in what they observe. You perceive the events, recognize your emotions, but do not allow them to distance you from your essence. Over time, it becomes evident that the greatest challenges are not in the outside world, but within ourselves, in the thoughts, interpretations, and impulses that we nurture daily. When this understanding begins to solidify, surprising changes occur. People who previously seemed determined to provoke reactions no longer find the same space to do so. Circumstances that used to consume their energy begin to have less impact, like clouds crossing the sky without altering their direction. This happens because resistance decreases, and where there is no internal confrontation, the wear and tear loses strength. However, this path is not simple. It requires courage to look inward, a willingness to question old beliefs, and a commitment to self-knowledge. For a long time, you may have believed that you were merely the result of the circumstances surrounding you. Jung suggests something different, that there is a deeper dimension of being, capable of consciously choosing how to respond to life. Acting like someone who doesn't let events overwhelm them doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means understanding that true power lies not in controlling everything that happens, but in developing self-mastery. It's the daily choice to remain firm even when everything around seems unstable. And it is precisely this transformation that we are beginning to explore now. When you adopt, even gradually, the posture of not reacting automatically to everything, an important discovery emerges. The first change doesn't happen in the outside world, but within you. Little by little, it becomes evident how conditioned you have been to respond automatically to life situations. A poorly chosen word, an unpleasant comment, a disapproving look, or an unexpected event was enough to trigger almost instantaneous reactions. Without realizing it, your energy was directed towards automatic defense mechanisms, many of them built up over the years and not always aligned with who you really are. It's as if your mind has been trained to remain constantly vigilant, looking for potential threats, anticipating criticism, and preparing justifications before they are even necessary. So, when you choose to interrupt this cycle and simply not react, something unexpected happens. An inner silence arises, and this silence may seem strange or even uncomfortable at first because, without the distractions of automatic reactions, you finally find yourself facing yourself, without masks, without noise, and without the filters that used to hide your true essence. This seemingly simple moment has extraordinary transformative potential. It is in this moment that you begin to realize how much of your tranquility, your well-being, and your sense of freedom has been, for years, in the hands of external circumstances. Gradually, it becomes evident that suffering rarely arises solely from events. Most of the time, it is fueled by the meaning we attribute to them, by the quick interpretations that the mind produces based on past experiences, deep insecurities, and beliefs accumulated throughout life. According to Jung, it is precisely in the hidden aspects of personality that we find the greatest opportunities for growth. When you choose not to react impulsively, you are not ignoring reality or becoming apathetic. In fact, you are interrupting repetitive patterns that for a long time have driven your emotions without you realizing it. It's like breaking an old script that always determined your responses to the same stimuli. And it is at this point that something surprising begins to happen. By ceasing to feed certain dynamics, you stop strengthening the mechanisms that previously found room to act. Criticism loses intensity, Provocative comments cease to have the same impact. Situations that once seemed unbearable become lighter. Not because people have changed or because the world has become different, but because your relationship with these experiences has been transformed. By abandoning the constant need to react, you become less predictable in the face of circumstances. A clearer perception of reality then emerges, not only of what happens around you, but mainly of what exists within you and has remained hidden for so long. As this posture of conscious presence strengthens, an even deeper understanding begins to emerge. You realize that many of the conflicts you attributed to the behavior of others actually reflected internal processes that remained unattended. What aroused irritation, discomfort, fear, or sadness was often connected to aspects of yourself that were still seeking recognition and understanding. Jung described this phenomenon as projection, the tendency to see in others contents that belong to our own inner world. When you stop reacting automatically, these projections begin to lose strength. Gradually, certain people cease to exert the same emotional dominance over you. The authoritarian figure no longer awakens the same feeling of inferiority. The constant criticism of someone close ceases to affect old wounds, and external opinions begin to be seen only as expressions of the vision of the person who expresses them. However, this path requires a willingness to face discomfort. By abandoning defense mechanisms built up over the years, you inevitably come into contact with parts of yourself that were previously hidden. It's like opening the windows of a room that has remained closed for a long time and allowing the light to reach forgotten spaces. This inner light often reveals old pains, poorly processed experiences, and emotional scars that have remained hidden under defensive habits, justifications, and impulsive reactions. For a long time, reacting to the world may have served as a way to avoid encountering yourself. But when this pattern is interrupted, the opportunity arises to look at these wounds with more awareness. And it is precisely in this encounter with what has been avoided for so long that one of the deepest forms of transformation resides. Because what is recognized can be understood, what is understood can be integrated, and what is integrated ceases to control your life from the shadows, becoming part of a new version of yourself, more conscious, freer, and more whole. As you progress through this process, an even deeper discovery begins to emerge. You realize that choosing not to react impulsively not only preserves your inner peace, but it also completely transforms how you relate to people and situations around you. What once fueled arguments, tensions, and emotional strain loses power when it ceases to receive your unconscious participation. It's like removing the wood from a seemingly endless fire. Without the energy of automatic responses, many conflicts cease to grow and end up dissolving naturally. What once seemed inevitable begins to lose intensity. And in this space free from unnecessary confrontations, something extremely valuable is born. The possibility of acting by choice, not by impulse. In this new state, you discover the freedom to exist without the constant need to defend yourself, explain your decisions, or seek approval. A different kind of strength emerges than the one the world usually admires. It's not the strength of imposition or rigid resistance, but that of a conscious, balanced presence connected to your true essence. Over time, this inner transformation begins to reflect in the reality around you as well. Relationships change, environments change. Dynamics that once seemed to repeat themselves indefinitely begin to lose ground. People who used to provoke emotional reactions or create tense situations realize, even without fully understanding why, that something is different now. Your posture begins to convey a silent, yet very clear message. You are no longer available for emotional games, power struggles, or subtle manipulations. And when these dynamics cease to find fertile ground, they often disappear on their own. Some people distance themselves not because they were rejected, but because they no longer find in you the same openness to sustain patterns that were previously unconsciously shared. What once fueled conflict transforms into neutrality. Provocation loses its purpose when it does not find a corresponding reaction. The cycle simply stops working. However, this change isn't always comfortable for those around you. When someone abandons old reaction patterns, they end up revealing aspects to others that they themselves might avoid seeing. Without saying a single word, Their transformation becomes a powerful reflection for those who remain trapped in habits of control, emotional dependence, resentment, or a constant need for validation. Not everyone is prepared to face this reflection. Therefore, during this journey, some connections may weaken. Certain friendships cease to have the same harmony. Some environments begin to seem incompatible with the person you are becoming. Although this may generate moments of loneliness, it is a natural movement of reorganization, and it is precisely in this process that space emerges for more genuine relationships, built on respect, authenticity, and mutual awareness. Relationships that do not depend on masks or emotional games to exist. Perhaps one of the greatest discoveries on this journey is realizing that many of the things you were relentlessly seeking in the outside world begin to lose their importance. The need for approval, recognition, or acceptance ceases to occupy the center of your life. Not because you become indifferent to others, but because you find something much more solid within yourself. By reducing the volume of external voices, you begin to hear your own inner voice more clearly. You discover a source of security that does not depend on constant praise, applause, or validation. You learn to find value in your own presence and to trust more deeply in who you are. This experience produces a feeling of freedom that is difficult to describe. It's as if old invisible shackles are gradually breaking, allowing you to walk with more lightness and authenticity, and then a transformative understanding emerges. True power has never been in trying to control people, circumstances, or events. True power has always been in the ability to govern your own inner world with awareness, balance, and emotional maturity. As this transformation deepens, an even more significant understanding begins to emerge. You realize that choosing not to be dominated by events is not just a way to preserve your emotional stability. It's a much deeper change, a true transformation in the way you exist and relate to life. At this point, Jung's ideas take on an even broader meaning. What is at stake is no longer just how you respond to external circumstances, but how you relate to the hidden aspects of your own psyche. It is an invitation to look head-on at everything that for years has remained in the background of consciousness. Old fears, limiting beliefs, emotional wounds, and unconscious patterns that have influenced decisions, behaviors, and perceptions without you even realizing it. This process is far from superficial. At many times, it requires courage to overcome internal discomfort and abandon old identifications. However, precisely for this reason, it carries enormous liberating potential. When you stop reacting automatically to life stimuli, you are sending a powerful message to yourself. It is as if you are declaring that you no longer wish to be driven by narratives built from insecurities and conditioning accumulated over time. Gradually, you begin to choose a different frame of reference for living. Instead of acting from wounds, you begin to act from awareness. Instead of responding to impulses from the past, you begin to respond to the clarity of the present. And this change, although silent, profoundly alters how you experience reality. Interestingly, when this internal transformation happens, the world around you also seems to respond differently. New people enter your life bringing more genuine affinities. Opportunities arise where there were previously blockages. Paths that seemed closed begin to open. And, above all, a sense of serenity begins to occupy spaces that were previously filled with anxiety, constant worry, and an excessive need for control. Perhaps one of the greatest discoveries of this journey is understanding that emotional maturity does not mean eliminating feelings or becoming indifferent to the human experience. The goal was never to stop feeling. Anger, sadness, fear, disappointment, and joy continue to be part of life. The difference is that you learn not to confuse yourself with what you feel. Emotions begin to be observed with more awareness. You recognize their presence, welcome their message, and allow them to follow their natural course without transforming them into a permanent identity. Instead of being swept away by them, you become able to accompany them without losing your own balance. It is in this space of conscious observation that a rare strength is born. Not a strength based on confrontation, imposition, or resistance, but a quiet, stable, and deeply centered strength. A presence that does not need to convince anyone of its worth, because its security no longer depends on external approval. As you settle into this new inner state, you realize that this serenity does not only function as protection against difficulties, it becomes a gateway to a broader perception of your own existence. Your way of seeing events changes. Situations that previously seemed threatening no longer have the same emotional weight. Challenges continue to exist, but they are no longer interpreted as enemies. Criticism begins to be viewed with more discernment. Judgments cease to determine your self-esteem. Losses are understood as an inevitable part of life's cycles. Even failures begin to be seen as learning experiences, not as permanent definitions of your identity. Little by little, you realize that what once seemed overwhelming was linked not only to the events themselves, but to how you identified with them. And by reducing this identification, a new perspective emerges. It's as if you finally occupy an inner space that has always been present, but which remained hidden under layers of fear, reactivity, and emotional conditioning. In this place, there is more clarity, more freedom, and more awareness. And it is from there that you begin to live not as someone constantly dragged along by circumstances, but as someone capable of navigating them while maintaining contact with your own essence. It is at this stage that a deep understanding ceases to be just an idea and transforms into a real experience. What once seemed like just a concept becomes something lived daily. External events do not, by themselves, have the power to determine your inner peace. The world continues to change, people continue to act according to their own nature, and challenges continue to be part of existence. The difference is that you no longer feel the need to allow all of this to govern your emotional state. Gradually, the perception arises that there is a space within you that remains stable, even when everything around seems unstable. While life follows its flow of changes, demands, and unforeseen events, this inner core remains firm, like a point of equilibrium that does not depend on circumstances to exist. And it is precisely in this space that you find something precious: lucidity. This lucidity transforms the way you conduct your life. Decisions cease to arise from impulsiveness and begin to emerge from awareness. Your choices become more consistent with your values. Your way of expressing yourself gains authenticity, and the weight you once carried lessens, because you discover that it's possible to participate in life without being consumed by it. With this newfound clarity, an even more significant perception begins to emerge. You understand that staying centered doesn't mean distancing yourself from people or becoming indifferent to the world. On the contrary, by abandoning automatic reactions, you begin to see reality with more depth than before. People cease to be seen only for their superficial behaviors. You begin to realize that behind attitudes, criticisms, defenses, and conflicts, there are stories, fears, insecurities, and wounds that often remain invisible. The perspective becomes broader and less judgmental. Instead of seeing others as threats or obstacles, you begin to recognize them as human beings going through their own learning processes. Just like you, each person carries internal challenges, limitations, pains, and quests that influence how they relate to life. From this understanding, a more conscious relationship with the world is born. Compassion replaces some of the judgments. Understanding occupies the space previously filled by resistance, and peace ceases to depend so much on the behavior of others, becoming an internally constructed condition. When this transformation takes hold, something even deeper begins to reveal itself. You realize that many of the experiences you previously considered obstacles may have been opportunities in disguise. Difficult moments, disappointments, conflicts, and losses begin to be seen from a different perspective. What once seemed like mere suffering begins to reveal its learning potential. Each challenging situation emerges as an invitation to develop more awareness, more maturity, and more self-knowledge. What was once interpreted as punishment begins to be understood as part of a growth process. You begin to realize that life has been constantly pointing inward. Each challenge carried the possibility of showing something about yourself. Each discomfort offered an opportunity to recognize hidden patterns. Each crisis contained a call to awaken from old conditioning. Jung expressed this idea by stating that what remains unconscious tends to direct our lives without us realizing it. And when you choose to interrupt automatic reactions, you begin a movement of liberation in relation to these invisible mechanisms. From that moment on, you stop being driven only by fears, habits, and accumulated content over the years. Instead of automatically repeating the same patterns, you begin to act with more presence and discernment. Your life ceases to be governed by unconscious forces and begins to reflect choices made in a more conscious way. It is at this point that one of the greatest forms of freedom emerges: the ability to participate in one's own story, not as someone who merely reacts to events, but as someone who assumes with lucidity and responsibility the role of author of their own journey. From that moment on, your understanding of your own existence begins to take on a new form. You stop believing that your mission is to constantly meet the expectations of others, seek approval, or mold your identity to be accepted by others. Similarly, it abandons the need to wage a permanent battle against the world, trying to prove its worth or gain recognition at any cost. Little by little, it becomes evident that the deepest meaning of life is not only in external achievements, accumulated accomplishments, or praise received. It lies in something much more intimate: the continuous process of approaching your true nature and living in a way that is consistent with it. And this approach does not happen through force or excessive control. It is born from an attitude of trust and openness towards life. It is not about giving up or settling, but about allowing your essence to have more space than the fears, masks, and conditioning built up over the years. When this connection strengthens, you realize that many events that previously exerted enormous influence on your emotional state gradually lose their power. This happens because they no longer find within you the same triggers, insecurities, or needs that previously fueled automatic reactions. Perhaps one of the most surprising discoveries of this journey is realizing that this inner stability doesn't make you colder or more distant. On the contrary, you become more human, more capable of understanding the pain of others, more open to compassion and genuine affection. The difference is that now your sensitivity is not accompanied by emotional dependence. You continue to love, but in a freer way. You continue to care, but without carrying the weight of needing to control, convince, or be constantly validated. Love ceases to be an attempt to fill internal voids and becomes a natural manifestation of fullness. In this state, you realize that your relationship with the world changes profoundly, not because the world has transformed, but because your way of seeing it has become different. What once seemed like a constant threat becomes understood as part of the human experience. And then a liberating realization emerges. The greatest challenge was never in the external circumstances, but in how you related to them internally. When this inner conflict begins to dissolve, a previously unknown lightness begins to occupy space in your life. Fear loses intensity. The need for control diminishes. Anxiety ceases to command your choices, and you learn to walk with more presence, trusting more in yourself and in the natural flow of events. Looking at your journey, you realize that this change did not happen because of an extraordinary event or a miraculous solution. It was born from a silent decision made within yourself. The decision not to allow automatic thoughts, uncontrolled emotions, or old conditioning to continue defining who you are. What seemed like just a change of attitude reveals itself over time as a true milestone of transformation. It's like crossing an invisible door that separates two ways of living. On one side, there is life driven by impulses, fears, and unconscious reactions. On the other, there is life lived with presence, responsibility, and awareness. It is at this point that a simple yet profoundly transformative truth becomes evident. Everything you desperately sought in the outside world, acceptance, security, respect, love, and recognition, was not really far away. These qualities already existed within you, just waiting for the moment when you stopped seeking them exclusively outside yourself. Perhaps this is the deepest meaning of this practice of not letting yourself be dominated by events. It's not about ignoring emotions or pretending that nothing matters. Nor does it mean becoming indifferent to life. It's about developing such solid stability that challenges cease to have the power to distance you from your essence. It's about learning to navigate difficult times with the same presence with which you appreciate happy moments. It's about embracing losses, criticism, and unforeseen events without allowing them to determine your worth or your identity. It's about understanding that serenity does not depend on the absence of storms, but on the ability to remain centered while they pass. And when you reach this state, you discover that true freedom lies not in controlling what happens around you, but in remaining true to yourself regardless of what happens. Life continues on its course. Moments arrive, fulfill their purpose, and move on. People come and go. Circumstances change. Joys and difficulties alternate. However, amidst all this movement, something within you remains firm. You no longer feel driven by events or lost in impulsive reactions. Instead, you begin to occupy a space of greater awareness, stability, and presence. In this state, the constant need to justify your choices, defend every attitude, or seek approval for everything you do disappears. You discover a security that is born from within, a confidence that does not depend on external opinions to exist. And when this inner foundation strengthens, life ceases to seem like a permanent struggle and begins to be understood as a continuous learning process. Each experience takes on a new meaning. Pleasant moments are appreciated with gratitude, while challenges are seen as opportunities for growth. Everything becomes raw material to broaden self-understanding and deepen awareness. Perhaps the greatest invitation of this journey is extremely simple: to experiment, not as a theory to be accepted, but as an experience to be tested. Try, even for a short period, to go through your days without allowing each event to determine your inner state. Observe what happens when you stop feeding unnecessary conflicts and abandon the need to react to everything. You may notice that many problems lose intensity when they don't receive your constant energy. Certain provocations cease to find space to grow. Many fears weaken when they stop being fed by repetitive thoughts. And little by little, an inner silence emerges that paves the way for a new way of living. It is in this space that a discovery occurs that is impossible to convey through words alone. No book, philosophy, or teaching can replace the direct experience of feeling freedom within oneself. It is something that can only be truly understood when lived. Perhaps this is precisely the essence of Jung's reflections on self-knowledge. The understanding that the deepest transformation does not happen when we change the world around us, but when we change the way we relate to it. And when that change happens, something irreversible begins. After experiencing a deeper level of consciousness, you can hardly see life the same way again. Imagine, then, discovering a perspective capable of altering not only your view of reality, but also the way you participate in it. This is not about magical thinking or expecting everything to happen according to your wishes. It is about understanding a profound psychological principle. The way we interpret events directly influences the experience we have of them. Many people go through life believing that they are at the mercy of circumstances, constantly reacting to what happens around them. They live in a constant state of resistance, as if reality were always fighting against their plans and expectations. However, Jung observed something different. For him, the external world and the internal world are connected in much deeper ways than we normally imagine. The way we see life influences what we perceive in it. Our beliefs, emotions, and unconscious contents actively participate in the construction of our experience. When this understanding begins to become conscious, challenges take on a different meaning. What previously seemed like just a problem begins to carry a possibility for learning. Difficulties cease to be seen merely as barriers and begin to reveal aspects of the personality that may need attention, development, or integration. It is in this context that many people report experiences that Jung called synchronicities, seemingly unconnected events that, surprisingly, seem to acquire meaning when observed together. Situations, encounters, and opportunities begin to make sense within a broader perspective, as if life were constantly offering signs and possibilities for growth to those who are willing to observe them. And when you begin to look at existence from this perspective, you realize that perhaps nothing is happening simply by chance. Each experience, pleasant or challenging, can carry an important message for your evolution. And this perception transforms not only how you interpret reality, but also how you choose to live each day. This idea did not arise as a simple attempt to offer comfort in the face of life's difficulties. It is based on a deep understanding of the human mind, observed and discussed by different philosophical, psychological, and spiritual traditions throughout history. For decades, Jung investigated the influence of unconscious contents on how we interpret the world and on the role these interpretations play in constructing our daily experience. It is from this understanding that the proposal to live with the confidence that each event can contribute to your growth is born. However, this perspective is often misinterpreted. It is not about denying problems, ignoring reality, or repeating optimistic phrases without conviction. The true meaning lies in developing an inner posture based on conscious confidence, choosing to believe that there is a broader meaning behind events even when it cannot yet be clearly perceived. Adopting this attitude means abandoning the view that everything happens against you and beginning to consider that each experience, pleasant or difficult, can carry a learning opportunity. This does not eliminate pain, nor does it prevent challenges from appearing. The difference lies in how you face them. Instead of seeing them only as obstacles, you begin to see them as parts of a larger process, the understanding of which often only emerges over time. To understand why this change of perspective has such an impact, it is necessary to look at the workings of the mind at a deeper level. A large part of the decisions, emotions, and perceptions that influence our lives do not originate from conscious logic, but from internal processes that operate silently behind the scenes of consciousness. Jung dedicated a large part of his career to the study of this invisible universe. For him, the unconscious was not just a place where forgotten memories remained stored. It was a dynamic dimension of the psyche, constantly influencing how we interpret reality and react to events. What you believe about yourself, about others, and about life has a much greater impact than you usually imagine. Your beliefs act as filters that organize how you perceive the world, and often, these filters act so automatically that you don't even realize their influence. This observation leads to an important reflection. Your experience of reality depends not only on objective facts, but also on how your mind interprets them. When someone lives dominated by negative expectations, insecurity, or constant fear, they tend to direct their attention to everything that confirms these beliefs. In this state, the brain begins to highlight problems, risks, and limitations, while ignoring opportunities, resources, and possibilities. It's like observing a landscape through a foggy window. What you see does not represent all of reality, but only the part that your filters allow you to see. Modern psychology and neuroscience help explain this phenomenon. The brain seeks to save energy by repeating already known patterns. Therefore, it tends to reinforce familiar mental pathways, even when they produce undesirable results. The more a belief is repeated, the more natural it becomes, and the more easily it influences future thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. This is how many people end up reliving similar experiences over the years. The scenarios change, the characters change, but the conflicts repeat themselves. The difficulties take on new forms but seem to follow the same emotional script. Without realizing it, they remain trapped in internal structures that continue to produce similar interpretations of reality. But there is an extremely important aspect to this dynamic. If limiting patterns can be strengthened by repetition, new patterns can also be built. And it is precisely at this point that a transformative possibility arises. When you begin to question old beliefs and broaden your way of seeing life, something begins to change. Your perspective becomes more open. Your attention begins to perceive alternatives that previously went unnoticed. Solutions emerge where only obstacles existed before. Possibilities appear where only doubts existed before. Perhaps it's not magic in the literal sense of the word, but for those who experience this shift in consciousness, it often seems close to it. After all, when the way of seeing reality transforms, the very experience of reality also begins to transform.